The door was supposed to be a closet. That was the only thought Kyle had time for before he threw it open, closet, storage room, anywhere, and stumbled through into candlelight and warmth and a girl at a wash basin who turned around and stopped breathing when she saw him. Behind him, boots thundered through the servant passage. Torchlight swept under the gap. Lord Davon's voice carried through the stone walls with the calm precision of a man giving orders he had been rehearsing for months. Check every door, every floor. He has not left this palace. Kyle pressed himself against the wall beside the door, chest heaving, blood drying along his jaw from a wound he couldn't remember receiving. His crown was gone. His authority was gone. 3 hours ago, he had been the most powerful wolf in 5 provinces. His wolf was still awake inside him, coiled, furious, straining against the instinct to turn and fight. Every primal thing in him was screaming to run, to shift, to tear through the men hunting him with tooth and claw. He held it down through sheer force of will. Shifting now would confirm everything Davon had accused him of. Now he was hiding in a room the size of a wardrobe, bleeding on someone else's floor. The girl had not screamed yet. That was either very good or very bad. She was staring at him with dark, arrested eyes, a wet cloth still clutched to her chest, water dripping from her fingers onto the floorboards. Small, brown-skinned, hair braided back from a face that gave nothing away except the fact that her mind was moving very fast behind her stillness. She knew who he was. He could see it. He watched her calculate. His wolf processed her before his mind did, the way wolves always did, reading what the body said before the mouth could lie. Her heartbeat was elevated, but controlled. Her scent carried fear, yes, but underneath it something steadier. Determination. The particular chemical signature of a person who had been afraid before and learned to function inside it. Not panic. Managed fear. That was different. The boots outside slowed, stopped. The torchlight under the door held steady, a guard pausing, listening, deciding. The girl moved first. She crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed his arm, and pulled him below the window line as torchlight swept the glass. Both of them pressed against the wall, perfectly still. I could hear the guard's heartbeat on the other side of the door. Slow, bored, not suspicious yet, just routine. The torchlight moved on. "Stay down," she breathed, "and stop looking like a king." Her name was Mira. She had lived in this room for 4 years and made peace with every limitation of it. The 12 feet, the wall outside the window, the single candle she rationed carefully, the chest that held everything she owned in the world. She had made it immaculate, not from pride, but from the need to control something in a life where almost nothing was hers to control. It was enough. She had repeated that to herself often enough that it had almost stopped feeling like a consolation. Then the Alpha King sat down on her floor, and the room became the smallest space she had ever occupied. She looked at him, torn shirt, bloodied jaw, the shattered remnants of authority still written into every line of his face, fighting with something rawer underneath, and made a rapid series of calculations, the kind she had been making since she was 11 years old and the world stopped being safe. He was innocent, or he wasn't. The wolf in him was visible even now, amber eyes slightly too bright, a tension in his stillness that wasn't human stillness, the particular quality of a predator holding itself completely motionless. She had grown up knowing what alphas were. She had spent 4 years learning how to be invisible to them. If he was innocent, she had just made the most important decision of her life. She dampened a cloth at the basin without asking permission, sat across from him on the floor, pressed it to the cut along his jaw. He went absolutely still, not from pain, she thought, but from the specific surprise of unexpected gentleness from someone he had no reason to expect it from. She could feel the effort it took him not to pull away, the wolf's instinct to reject comfort from an unknown quantity warring with something more exhausted and more human. "You don't have to," You're bleeding on my floor. She kept her voice flat, practical. Hold still. He held still. This close, she could see the details the distance had blurred. The exhaustion layered behind his eyes, amber, lupine bright even now, the irises carrying that particular quality that alpha wolves had, like fire through amber glass. The precise set of his jaw. A man holding himself together through sustained will, the way people do when everything has gone wrong at once and falling apart is not an option. She recognized it because she wore the same expression herself on bad days. His hands were completely steady. So were hers. Outside the walls, the palace continued its organized chaos, boots, voices, Davin's cold instructions threading through it all, precise, patient, the sound of a plan in motion. "One night," she said when she had finished. He looked at her. "You can stay until morning. After that, you're someone else's problem." Something moved through his expression, not gratitude exactly, but the look of a man revising every assumption he'd walked in with. Like he had never once in his adult life been assessed so quickly and so completely by someone with no reason to assess him favorably, and was finding the experience disorienting. "You're not afraid of me," he said. She met his eyes. "Should I be?" He didn't answer, which told her more than any answer could have. She settled on the bed, back against the wall. He stayed on the floor. The candle burned between them, low and guttering. His wolf senses were cataloging everything in the room without his permission. The scent of lavender from her chest of linens, candle wax and old wood and something else, an herbal sharpness he couldn't identify, something deliberately applied, a scent that sat oddly against the natural warmth beneath it. He filed it away without knowing why. Outside, Lord Davin's search continued its systematic sweep. Mira listened to it and categorized what she heard. 17 guards, 4 corridor sweeps per hour, Davin himself moving between the second and third floors, directing. One night, she had said. She was already certain that was a lie. Then, quiet enough to be nothing, quiet enough to be stone settling, the scrape of a key in her lock. Cale heard it before she did. His head turned a fraction of a second before her eyes moved to the door, Wolf hearing catching the sound 3 full beats earlier, his body already tensing with the specific readiness of something that had lived for centuries on the difference between a threat and a false alarm. He caught himself, pressed a hand flat to the floor, held still. Her door, specifically. Mira was on her feet before she finished the thought, one hand flat on Cale's shoulder. Don't move. Her eyes fixed on the handle as it turned with the careful patience of someone who did not want to be heard. The door opened 2 inches. One eye in the gap. Old, sharp, pale. Hesta. Mira's body released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Beside her, she felt Cale's tension change quality, from combat-ready to something more controlled. The old woman pressed bread and salt meat through the gap and leaned close enough that her words arrived as pure breath. "I saw nothing, I know nothing." A beat. "Feed him. He looks like something the wolves dragged in." Then she was gone. In the dark, Cale let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for hours. Morning arrived gray and indifferent. Mira was already dressed when the first bell rang. Apron tied, hair braided, the expression she wore when she had made a decision and was finished negotiating with herself about it firmly in place. Cale had not slept. She could tell by the quality of his stillness. Not the loose quiet of rest, but the rigid, coiled silence of a man who had spent the night replaying every moment leading to this room and finding no bottom to it. His wolf hearing had spent the night tracking every sound in the corridor outside. She had watched him tense twice at noises she couldn't hear, his head turning fractionally toward sounds that arrived for her several seconds later as distant footsteps. She had not commented on it. She set bread in front of him without ceremony. He looked at it like he had briefly forgotten what food was. "Eat," she said. "You're useless to yourself, half dead." He ate. She watched his shoulders drop slightly, something behind his eyes shifting from pure survival back toward function, and felt something she had no clean name for move through her chest. Not pity. Pity would have been simpler. Something that lived closer to recognition, the particular feeling of seeing your own survival mechanisms operating in someone else's face, and understanding, in your body rather than your mind, exactly what it costs them. "Rules," she said. He looked up. "Don't touch the window. The afternoon light catches movement, and the east courtyard has eyes. Don't open the door for any reason. Don't make a sound after the third bell." She paused. "Don't pace. The floorboard near the chest creaks and the woman below me suspects anyone of everything." She held his gaze. "And don't shift. I don't know if the walls are thick enough to contain a wolf, and I'm not willing to find out." Something moved across his face. Surprise, and beneath it a flicker of something that might have been shame, that she had thought to say it, that she had needed to. "I won't," he said quietly, the first real promise he had made in this room. Cale opened his mouth for a moment. She could see the reflex forming, the automatic authority of a man who had never once been told what to do by someone he outranked in every conceivable category and been expected to simply accept it. She gave him a look. It was not an aggressive look, something quieter and more immovable than aggression. The look of a woman who had spent 4 years making decisions that kept her alive in a palace full of people who would have destroyed her if she had made them differently, and who had therefore stopped apologizing for the quality of her judgment. He closed his mouth. Something moved through his expression then. Surprise, genuine and unguarded, there and gone like light through a closing shutter. Like a man suddenly remembering what it felt like to be simply stopped. No politics, no deference, no calculation of what disagreeing might cost. Just a woman looking at him like he was a man making a foolish choice and simply refusing to tolerate it. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him like that. He found, to his considerable surprise, that he didn't mind it. She left without another word, slipping into the corridor with the smooth, practiced invisibility of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of moving through spaces without disturbing them. The door clicked shut. His wolf catalogued the room in her absence, her scent still present, that herbal sharpness over something warmer underneath, something his wolf kept returning to without permission and without a name for what it was looking for. He had been ignoring it since the moment she pressed the cloth to his jaw. He kept ignoring it now. He sat on the floor where she had left him, and for the first time in years, with no one watching, he let himself simply be afraid. The day was its own kind of education. Mira moved through the palace the way she always had, invisible, unhurried, a woman so consistently unremarkable that she had become part of the background architecture of the place. She changed linens in the east corridor, where Davin's personal secretary briefed 2 council members in voices just low enough to suggest they believed no one important was listening. She refilled oil lamps outside the records hall and stayed 3 minutes longer than necessary. She delivered breakfast trays to the noble quarters and kept her eyes down and her ears open like windows. By midday, she had heard enough to make her hands shake inside her pockets, where no one could see them. Davin's forgeries were thorough, impossibly thorough. Letters in Kael's handwriting, or close enough to fool men who wanted to be fooled, detailing arrangements with a foreign faction. 3 council members had already signed the warrant extension. 2 more were considering. The palace did not believe Kael had fled. Not yet. By tomorrow, believing would become easier than doubting. She moved carefully past a group of palace wolves in the east corridor. beta guards, heads lifting slightly as she passed, noses working. She kept her pace perfectly even. Her suppressants were holding. They had to keep holding. She returned at nightfall with food and information, and the particular composure of a woman who had learned to carry frightening things without letting them show in her face. Cale was exactly where she had left him. He had not paced, she checked the floorboard. He had not touched the window. He had, however, reorganized her bookshelf, which she noted and chose not to address. She sat across from him and laid everything out. The forgeries, the council members, the timeline she had assembled from 14 hours of careful, invisible listening. He was silent for a long time when she finished. "How did you get all of that?" "I cleaned their rooms, served their meals, stood in their corridors while they spoke." She met his eyes evenly. "People talk in front of me because they've never considered that I might be listening. They've made that assumption for 4 years." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. Heavier. The kind that comes when someone has said something that reframes a larger picture. His wolf had been tracking the building outside all day from this room, cataloging heartbeats through walls, mapping the search patterns by sound alone. He had known the guard rotation better than Mira by the second hour, but he had not known what they were saying. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "Because you came through the wrong door," she said, "and I'm not the kind of person who lets innocent things die when I can stop it." Not warm, not a declaration, simply true, delivered with the plainness of a woman who had stopped needing her convictions to be recognized in order to hold them. Something shifted in his expression, cracked loose from behind the composure he had been maintaining since the council chamber. Raw and unguarded and gone again quickly, like a window briefly opened. He looked at her the way people rarely looked at her, like she was worth seeing, like the seeing was not incidental to something else he wanted, but the point itself. His wolf was very quiet all of a sudden. Not the coiled readiness it had maintained since the council chamber, something stiller than that. Something that sat in his chest and paid attention without demanding anything. He didn't examine it. Then his hand moved, barely just a shift of his weight that brought him slightly closer across the floor, and stopped, like a man catching himself mid-motion and choosing deliberately to hold still. She noticed. She said nothing, but she noticed. Then, from directly outside the door, unhurried and deliberate, footsteps stopped precisely where she had told him they always stopped. Cale heard it first. His head turned a full 2 seconds before the sound reached her, his body going to that particular motionless quality that wolves achieved when every sense was focused on a single point. He held up one hand, fingers spread. Warning. Mira moved before she had finished thinking. Candle pinched, light killed, complete darkness in one motion. 1 second, 2, 5, 8. He could hear the man's heartbeat on the other side of the door, steady, slightly elevated, not from suspicion, but from the effort of listening. The man was holding his breath, pressing his ear close to the wood. Cale made himself breathe slowly, made his own heartbeat slow with it. Wolf discipline, the thing he had trained since boyhood, the ability to bring his own biology to heel when the situation required it. The footsteps continued. When she finally let herself breathe, Cale's voice came from the dark, very quiet. "Does that happen every night?" "Most nights." "I heard him stop before you did," he said. "His heart rate went up when he reached your door specifically." She was quiet for a moment. "That's useful," she said. 8 days in, the room had developed its own quiet rhythms. She left at first light, he stayed hidden, she returned at nightfall. They worked, mapping the conspiracy in careful increments, building the picture piece by piece from the fragments she gathered and the architectural knowledge of power he supplied from memory. His memory was extraordinary. Names, dates, council votes, the specific procedural language of legal documents. He held it all without effort. But increasingly, he was contributing something else as well. The wolf skiffs, available now for the first time to someone who knew how to use them. He tracked the heartbeats of the guards through the walls and reported the rotation times precisely. He caught scent traces through the door gap, told her which council members had visited the floor above that day, which ones were carrying stress hormones, which ones had been drinking. Information she had no other way to gather. She listened to it all and wrote it down without ceremony, without making him feel like a tool or a curiosity, simply incorporating it into the map the way she incorporated everything, efficiently, with the focused attention of someone who understood that every piece of information had its place. "You've never used your abilities like this," he said one evening, not a question. "I'm not the one with abilities," she said. "You are," he said. "They're just different from mine." The seamstress was named Bretta, older, careful-eyed, the kind of woman who had survived palace life by knowing precisely how much to say and to whom. She pressed a folded sheet into Mira's hands and held on half a second too long. "You're asking about Davin," she said. "I'm asking about several things." Bretta's eyes moved to the door. Back. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Ask about Lyria," she said. Then she let go and walked away, unhurried, unremarkable, the practice exit of a woman who had said exactly what needed saying and not a syllable beyond it. Mira stood in the sewing room for 3 full seconds after she left. The name sat in her chest like a stone in still water. She didn't know yet what it meant. She spent the next 2 days finding out. Later, walking back through the corridors with linen in her arms, she passed the tapestry near the east staircase. Old, faded, the kind of thing that had hung so long it had become part of the wall. She had passed it hundreds of times. Today, something made her stop. In the corner of the tapestry, barely visible where the dye had faded to near nothing, a small flowering vine. She had seen that exact shape before. Not in the tapestry. Drawn in the margins of her mother's recipes, over and over without explanation. A small white flower her mother had sketched without ever naming. She stood and stared at it for a long moment. Then she kept walking. It took 3 sources to build the complete picture. A daughter, Davin's only child, an Omega, which the noble houses treated as a quiet embarrassment and the law treated as an opportunity. A visiting lord had filed a forced mating claim 18 months before Kale's Omega Protection Act passed. The case moved through official channels with the particular patience of a system never designed to inconvenience powerful men. Davin had fought it. He had petitioned the council twice. He had requested a direct audience with the king. The audience was postponed. Pressing matters, a border negotiation, a trade summit that ran 3 days long. The audience was rescheduled and then absorbed by something else. Lyria died 11 months into the forced bond. The Omega Protection Act was signed 4 months later. Mira sat with all of it for a full day before she told him, not because she doubted its relevance, but because she understood what it was going to cost him to hear it. Some truths needed to be carried first by the person delivering them. She had learned that from her mother. It was, she thought, the most useful thing grief had ever taught her. She told him that evening, plainly. No arrangement of facts to soften the landing, just the sequence in its actual order. The claim, the petition, the postponed audiences, the death, the 4 months, the act that would have saved her. The room went very quiet. Kale did not move. He sat with his back against her bed and looked at the middle distance with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not grief exactly, not guilt exactly, but the specific look of a man being required to hold something fully that he had been carefully holding at arm's length for years. "You already knew her name," Mira said. "Not an accusation." "I signed the condolence letter." His voice was stripped of everything practiced. Standard language, 3 sentences. He stopped. "I didn't let myself think about what it meant. There are always more urgent things." The justification arrived hollow even to his own ears. She watched the moment it stopped working. The precise instant the story he had told himself cracked along a fault line that had apparently been there all along, just waiting for the right pressure. She said nothing. His wolf was very still. Not suppressed, present, sitting with him inside the weight of it, which was, she thought, perhaps the most honest thing she had seen from him yet. She had learned long ago that silence, applied correctly, did more than any words. She watched him sit inside the full weight of it, the undeflectable truth that a girl had died in the gap between his good intentions and his completed actions, and she did not rescue him from it. He deserved to hold it completely. So had Lyria. He didn't sleep that night. Mira knew, because she didn't either. The candle burned between them in the dark, and neither spoke, and the silence was not comfortable, but it was honest, which she had come to believe was worth considerably more. At some point in the hours before dawn, without either of them deciding to, the distance between them on the floor had closed, not touching, just close. The specific proximity of two people who had stopped needing to maintain the fiction of comfortable distance. She became aware of it gradually. She chose not to move. He didn't either. His wolf would have known the exact moment her breathing changed from wakefulness to sleep, if she had slept. She didn't. He knew that too. Knew it without looking, the way wolves always knew, through the air between them. Outside, Davin's search continued its patient work. Neither of them spoke until the gray light came. When morning arrived, Cale spoke without looking at her. "I know this doesn't change what Davin did. Rough from a night of silence, scraped clean of everything performative. But you should know, he's not entirely lying about who I failed to be." The most honest thing she had heard anyone say in 4 years of listening to powerful men. Mira looked at him for a long time, at the exhaustion carved into his face, at the man underneath the king, sitting on her worn floorboards, holding himself accountable in a 12-foot room with no audience and nothing to gain from it. Even the wolf in his eyes looked tired, not diminished, just finally, genuinely present without performance. "I know," she said quietly. He looked up. "That's why I'm still helping you." Something moved through his expression, raw and unguarded and gone in an instant, like a door opened onto something large and immediately, carefully, closed again. Then her eyes dropped to the cloth she had brought last night and not yet mentioned. She held it out. He unwrapped it. Inside, a transfer order. Davin's seal. Every Omega servant in the palace transferred to direct council authority the moment a new king was installed, including her. 3 sharp knocks landed on the door before he could speak. The pattern meant only one thing. Someone in the network had been caught. His name was Pip, 14-year-old. He had been asking about Davin's document schedule on Mira's behalf, 1 question too many to 1 person too observant, and now he was sitting in the steward's office being asked things no child should have to answer. Mira had him out in 40 minutes. She walked into the steward's office carrying linen requisition forms she had no reason to possess, announced that Pip was needed immediately in the Upper East Wing for a spill threatening a countess's carpet, and delivered it with the flat urgency of a woman who had never once been wrong about a carpet. The steward released him. They didn't speak until 2 full corridors separated them from the office. Then she gripped his shoulder once, briefly, and he nodded and disappeared into the servant passages. She returned to her room and told Cale. He listened to the whole account. Then, "He's 14. "He's been here since he was 10, she said. "He knows more about this palace than most of your council members." A long pause. "Because it was dangerous not to." "Yes," she said, "exactly that." 12 days in, she spread the full map across the floor between them, drawn over 3 evenings from memory. Not the palace's official architecture, but its living systems, guard rotations in one color, servant movement patterns in another, The invisible geography of habit and schedule that she had spent 4 years learning with the thoroughness of someone whose safety depended on it. Cale leaned over it in the candlelight and went very still. You built all of this? Over 4 years, yes. When did you start? The first week I arrived. Her voice stayed even, factual. A noble grabbed my arm in a corridor. I needed to know which guard I could trust to look the other way, so I found out. And then I kept finding out, because it turned out there was always something else worth knowing. The silence that followed was different from all the others, heavier, with a specific quality she had come to recognize as the sound of a man genuinely reckoning with something. I built it, she said quietly, because the world you rule made it dangerous not to. He had no answer. She hadn't expected one, but she had needed to say it. He looked at the map for a long time, then he said something she hadn't expected. Tell me where to look, he said, with my hearing, with my nose. Tell me what you need to know about the corridors outside, and I'll tell you what I can find. She looked at him. You'd do that, she said, not a question. I've been useless in this room for 12 days, he said. Let me be useful. They worked through the night over the map, tracing routes, marking names, building the shape of what needed to happen and when. At some point, the distance between them had closed without either deciding to close it, knee to knee over the candlelight, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against her arm when she leaned forward to mark something on the map. She was explaining the records hall access pattern when her hand stopped moving. A name in the rotation schedule, one she hadn't fully cross-referenced. The guard assigned to her corridor for the next 4 nights. She knew that name from a different list, the list she maintained carefully and privately of palace staff she knew with certainty reported directly to Davin. What is it? Cale's voice was quiet. He had learned to read her stillness. She turned the paper toward him. The guard outside this door right now, she said, keeping her voice level through an act of sustained will, reports to Davin. Cale went very still in the way that was different from human stillness, the absolute, motionless quality of a predator at full attention. His eyes had shifted slightly, the amber brightening in the low light. I can hear him, he said quietly. His heart rate is elevated. He's been outside this door for 4 minutes. 3 slow, deliberate knocks landed on the door. Not a search pattern. A message. The rhythm of someone communicating that they knew exactly what was behind the door and were choosing, for now, to wait. Mira and Cale looked at each other across the candlelight for one suspended second. She pointed at the wardrobe. He moved without a word, smooth, silent, wolf-quiet in a way that no human could have managed in that small a space. The wardrobe door closed without a sound. She had 4 seconds. She used every one. Candle to the windowsill, map under the mattress, her face arranged into the blankness she had spent 4 years perfecting. Not frightened, not defiant, simply a tired woman answering her door. She opened it. The guard was broad-shouldered, pale-eyed. His name was Ferris. She knew him. Davin's household before the palace transfer. A brother with gambling debts that Davin had quietly absorbed. And not particularly clever, which made him more dangerous than a clever man. Clever men could be reasoned with. Routine sweep, he said. His eyes moved past her into the room. Of course. She stepped aside. Not too much, not too little. Exactly the space a woman with nothing to hide would offer. He moved through the room with the methodical attention of a man who had been told specifically what to look for without being told specifically where. Basin, chest, bed, checked with a perfunctory lift of the blanket. Then his eyes snagged on the bookshelf. The reorganized bookshelf, Cale's work from day one. She had never fixed it. Ferris studied it with the unfocused suspicion of a man who sensed something wrong without being able to identify it. The most dangerous kind of suspicion, she knew, because it had no specific target to be deflected from. He inhaled slowly. She watched his nostrils move. Wolf, then. Beta rank, but wolf nonetheless. Her suppressants prickled at her awareness. "You read?" he asked. "When I can afford candles? Bored, faintly tired. Perfect." He looked at her for a moment that stretched considerably longer than it should have. She held his gaze with the specific vacancy of someone with nothing to hide, who was mildly inconvenienced by having to prove it. Inside the wardrobe, she knew, Cale was tracking Ferris's heartbeat, his stress hormones, the exact quality of his suspicion. She knew because she could feel the weight of that attention even through the wooden door. He left. She closed the door, pressed her back against the wood. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she pressed them flat against her thighs. The wardrobe opened. Cale crossed the room in 4 steps and wrapped both hands around hers. She didn't pull away. She had nothing left to pull away with. His hands were warm, always warmer than human normal, she had noticed, the wolf's higher metabolism producing a steady heat that she had become accustomed to over 12 days, without quite meaning to. He held hers the way you hold something you are not willing to drop, and neither of them spoke while her breathing slowly stopped trying to escape her chest and became something manageable. This close, she could feel his pulse against her fingers. Steady. Deliberate. He was managing it consciously, she understood that now, knowing what she knew about wolf biology, bringing his own heartbeat down through practiced discipline, holding it steady for her benefit, because a wolf's calm had its own chemistry and its own way of carrying through the air to the people near them. He was using what he was to help her. Neither of them moved for a long time. Outside, Ferris's footsteps moved down the corridor, slow, unsatisfied. "He was suspicious," Cale said quietly, "but not certain. His heart rate was elevated the whole time. He'll report that something felt wrong, but he has nothing specific." "How long before he comes back?" His cortisol spiked when he saw the bookshelf. A pause. "A day, maybe 2, before he's certain enough to act." "Then we move before that," she said. They didn't sleep. Not from vigilance, though that too. But something had broken open in the room, some membrane of careful distance that the night had punctured without meaning to. And on the other side of it was just the 2 of them, tired and frightened, and past the point of pretending otherwise. Cale spoke first. He told her about the coronation, 17 years old, his father's crown pressed onto his head by men who had already decided what kind of king he would be permitted to become. About the reforms killed slowly in committee by men who smiled at him in person and voted against him in chambers. About the specific, grinding loneliness of being surrounded by people who all wanted something from you and calling that company. "My wolf knew," he said at one point, almost to himself. Wolves read intent underneath the words. Every court audience, every council session, my wolf knew what they were actually feeling. Contempt, calculation, hunger. I spent years learning to ignore what it told me because acting on it would have looked like paranoia. But it was right, she said. He looked at her. It was right. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without performance. "Have you ever told anyone that?" she asked when he had finished. "No," he said. "That's the problem with being the most powerful person in a room. You stop getting the truth." Then she was quiet for a moment. And then, so quietly, he went still to hear it. She told him about her mother. A village 2 days east, a woman who grew herbs in window boxes and sang while she worked, and died when Mira was 11 of an illness that wouldn't have been an illness if there had been a healer within a day's reach. The years after, drifting between towns, learning which smiles were safe, arriving at this palace at 18 with nothing except the clothes she wore and the intelligence of a girl who had been paying close attention her entire life. "I used to have this dream," she said. Her voice was very quiet, not wistful, honest, the way she said everything. "A room with a window, just light, and a garden outside, something growing, and enough time to sit in it and do nothing and have it cost me nothing." She said it like something she had almost forgotten was hers. He didn't say it sounded simple. He didn't say anything for a long moment. His wolf was very quiet, not watchful, something different. something he had no name for, some instinct that lived deeper than tactics or territory, that had been drawing his attention toward her since day one, and that he had been carefully, methodically ignoring. He stopped ignoring it for exactly 5 seconds. Then he folded it away again. "Have you ever had any version of it?" he asked. "I have a room with a wall," she said. He didn't laugh. She was glad of that. She fell asleep somewhere after the second bell, upright in her chair, head tilted against the wall, hands finally still in her lap. Cale watched the candle burn and did not sleep. He tracked the palace through the dark with his wolf senses, heartbeats shifting as guards changed rotation, the distant sound of someone crying 2 floors up, the specific silence of corridors emptied of all but the most dedicated insomniacs. The palace breathed around him. He had always been able to hear it breathing. He had never before been close enough to the bottom of it to hear what it sounded like from here. He thought about Lyria, about Mira's mother, about every person who had ever wanted the same small thing: a window, a garden, one morning with nothing required of them, and how many of them were still waiting for a king to move quickly enough to matter. In the gray silence before dawn, he made a decision with the particular quiet certainty of a man who had finally located what he had been failing to see. He would not be slow again, not about anything that mattered. Then his eyes moved to the floor beside the map. A folded paper, halfway out from under the mattress. Read it once. His blood went cold. A dispatch order. Davin's seal. Mira's name. Her room number, her rotation schedule, her network. At the bottom, in Davin's own handwriting, "She knows too much." He woke her immediately. She read it the way she read everything, completely, without visible reaction, her face arranged into the careful neutrality that he now understood cost her something every single time. Then she set it down. "How long have you known he suspected me?" "I knew the search was narrowing," she said. "I didn't know he had my name." "We don't have time anymore." "No." She stood and went to the chest, began removing things, the documents, the map, the copied schedules, assembling them with the focused efficiency of someone who had shifted, without ceremony, from planning into action. He watched her and understood that the woman who had spent 4 years making herself forgettable had just made a different kind of decision, quietly, without announcement, the way she made all her decisions. "Tell me what you need," he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. 6 people willing to be seen," she said. "I know exactly who." He nodded. "And I need you to trust me completely," she added, "from this point forward. No negotiating the terms, no counter-proposals." A pause. Then, "And if something goes wrong, if you hear something through the walls that I can't hear, or smell something changing, you tell me immediately. Your senses are part of this now." "Yes," he said, "to all of it," without hesitation. They moved through the next 12 hours in 2 separate streams. Mira went through the palace in her usual patterns: rounds, trays, linens. But the conversations embedded in those movements now had a different purpose. Not gathering, asking. Hesta, who had held a key and a secret and chosen both wisely, yes. Pip, 14 years old, caught once already, who said yes before she finished the sentence and looked briefly like he might cry with relief at being asked. Aldrich, the scribe who had spent 2 years copying Davin's correspondence and keeping private records of everything because he understood from the beginning that documentation was the only protection available to a man in his position. Yes. His voice was very steady. 2 kitchen women who had watched a council member accept payment in the lower courtyard and had been waiting, in the specific patient way of people who understand that their moment will come if they can only keep themselves alive until it does. Yes. A seamstress who had been present when Lyria's claim was filed and had never been asked to speak of it. She said yes in a voice that had been holding that yes for years. Cale spent the hours in the room doing the only things available to him. Thinking, and listening. He mapped the council chamber from memory, every member, every alliance, every debt and grievance and ambition. He identified the ones Davin had corrupted and the ones who had merely been convinced. And he listened through the walls, cataloged what his wolf gathered: heartbeats, stress responses, the chemical signature of fear versus calculation versus guilt. When Mira returned at nightfall, he had a second layer of intelligence ready. 3 council members whose elevated cortisol suggested they were reconsidering their positions, 2 guards whose conversation he had partially decoded through 2 floors of stone, the direction Lord Davin had been moving throughout the day, tracked by scent alone. She listened to all of it, added it to her map, modified 3 elements of the plan accordingly. He accepted all 3 modifications without argument. She noticed, said nothing about it directly, but something in her posture shifted, the way the smallest adjustments in a long-held balance register before they're consciously processed. Like a woman who had been waiting to see if he would actually do what he had said, trust her completely, and had just received her answer. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. The morning of arrived without ceremony. Mira stood outside her door in her gray uniform, worn at the elbows, the same she had been invisible in for 4 years, and felt the terror arrive in its full form. Not of Davin, not of guards or consequences. The terror was older and more specific. The terror of a woman who had built her entire survival on not being noticed, standing at the threshold of a room full of people whose purpose was to notice, carrying the deliberate intention to make them see her. 4 years of invisibility, about to end by choice. Cale appeared at her shoulder. He looked at her face, the particular stillness she deployed when she needed to hold something large, very still inside herself. And he didn't tell her she was brave. He didn't give a speech or offer the kind of encouragement that would have slid off her like water. He leaned close enough that only she would hear it and said, "Stop looking like someone who doesn't belong here." Her own words, delivered back to her with the weight of someone genuinely changed by them. She picked up the letters and walked. The council chamber silenced in layers. First, the nearest members, who looked up with the automatic authority of people unaccustomed to interruption. Then the middle rows, who registered the uniform and opened their mouths. Then the back of the room, where Lord Davin sat, impeccable, pale-eyed, completely still, who saw Mira's face and went several degrees colder than still. She walked to the center of the room. She did not look at the floor. She had made a decision somewhere between her door and this one that she was done looking at floors. "My name is Mira," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I have worked in this palace for 4 years. I am going to read you some letters." The objections erupted. "Who let a servant in here? Remove her. No standing. Outrage." She read through all of it with the specific patience of a woman who had learned that the people making the most noise were usually the ones with the most to lose. The letters were damning. She read every word. The first letter was the forgery instruction, Davin directing his scribe in precise detail on replicating Cale's handwriting, correction notes in Davin's own hand annotating the margins with the particular confidence of a man who had done this carefully and expected never to be found. Aldrich stepped forward from the doorway and confirmed every word, under his own name, in his own voice, with the specific dignity of a man who had been waiting 2 years for the question. The chamber went from outrage to silence. Silence in a council chamber was different from silence anywhere else. It meant the powerful men in the room were recalculating, and recalculating men were, temporarily, uncertain men. The second letter was the payment record. She read the council member's name aloud. clearly, without softening, without the instinctive protective mumble that 4 years of invisibility had trained into her throat. The kitchen women stepped forward, confirmed the exchange, gave the date, the location, the amount, the exact phrasing used by a man who believed no one who mattered was listening. The council member's face went the color of old ash. The third letter detailed the witness fabrication. Names, instructions, the precise false testimony each paid witness had been coached to deliver, with dates and amounts. By the time she finished reading it, the chamber had gone from uncertain to something that lived closer to afraid. Then Mira set down the letters. She hadn't planned what came next. It arrived the way true things arrive, not as a decision, but as an inevitability, as water finding cracks in stone without choosing to. "Before you restore your king," she said, "I need you to hear a name." The room stilled completely. And she told them about Lyria. She told it plainly: the claim, the petition, the postponed audiences, the death, the 4 months, the act signed too late for the woman it would have saved. She told it the way the seamstress had told her, and she watched it land on men who had been present for every step of it and had never once been required to hold the full shape of it together in a single room at a single moment without anywhere to look away. The silence changed quality entirely. Davin rose. His composure had fractured somewhere during Lyria's name. She could see it the way you see ice before it breaks. Something behind his pale eyes going from cold calculation to something volcanic and uncontrolled. 20 years of grief and rage arriving at the surface all at once. He moved around the table with the purposefulness of a man who had stopped calculating outcomes. "You have no right." His voice came out wrecked, stripped of everything political, the voice of a father, not a lord. "You know nothing about her. You know nothing about what it cost, what he cost." "I know what it cost her," Mira said quietly. He stopped. Something in the specific steadiness of her voice, the absence of cruelty in it, the presence instead of something that looked uncomfortably like understanding, stopped him more completely than any combative response could have. For one moment, they simply looked at each other. A man whose grief had metastasized into something monstrous. A woman who understood, precisely and personally, what it meant to lose someone to a system that moved too slowly to care. Then, the doors opened. The sound stopped every person in the room. Cale walked in. 17 days in a 12-foot room had not diminished him. He walked into the council chamber carrying something he hadn't possessed before, a quietness, a gravity that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with a man who had recently been required to be entirely honest about himself and had not flinched from what he found there. His wolf was present in every line of him, not the predatory dominance the court was accustomed to, but something steadier and harder to dismiss, the authority of an animal that has survived something and knows what it survived. The chamber was absolutely silent. He looked at Davin across the room. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not hatred. Recognition. 2 men who had both failed Lyria in different ways, standing in the same room with nowhere left to hide that truth. "She's right." His voice was even and completely certain. "Your daughter deserved better. So did everyone who waited while we deliberated." He held Davin's gaze without flinching. "That does not make what you did just. You framed an innocent man, you corrupted this council, you put every omega in this palace at risk to serve your grief, and you will answer for it." Davin's coalition broke within minutes. It happened the way structures fail, not dramatically, but practically, when the load-bearing element is removed. The council member whose name had been read aloud stepped back from Devon's side first. Then the two who had signed the warrant extension, who had been reading the room and understood the direction it was moving. Then three more, rapidly, the cascade of men deciding which side of history they preferred to be recorded on. By the time the guards were called, Davin stood alone at the center of the chamber. A man whose grief had consumed him so completely there was nothing left inside it resembling justice. He looked at Mira once before they let him out. She looked back. She did not look away. She did not hate him. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Standing in the center of this room she had never been given permission to occupy, she felt no triumph. Only the specific weight of a situation that was tragic long before it became criminal, and the sober understanding that winning and healing were not, in fact, the same thing. The chamber emptied slowly. Council members filed out in the particular chastened quiet of people who needed to privately reassemble their positions before speaking publicly. Davin was escorted through the eastern door. Aldrich and Hesta and Pep and the kitchen women and the seamstress were taken to a side room to give their formal accounts, which they did with the careful dignity of people who had waited a long time to be asked. Cale found Mira at the far end of the chamber. Back to the room, both hands pressed flat on the stone windowsill, the letters still in her other hand. She hadn't let go of them. He came to stand beside her, not crowding, close enough to be there. "It's done," he said quietly. She nodded. Her hands were shaking the same way they had shaken against her door after Ferris's inspection, and this time there was no emergency on the other side of it demanding she stop. He reached over and covered her hands with his. She let him. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary afternoon. Inside, for one moment, neither of them moved or spoke, just stood, hands joined, in the room she had walked into and refused to be small in. Then the chamber door opened again. A council clerk crossed the room with the specific urgency of someone carrying news they did not want to deliver. "Your Majesty," his eyes moved briefly to Mira, "we have a problem." Cale's hand tightened over hers. "Davin's nephew. He left the city 2 days ago. We believed he had fled." A pause too long. "He didn't flee. He went to the northern garrison. He has been appointed by emergency council provision, signed before today's session, before we knew." The clerk swallowed. "He has the royal seal. He has 3,000 soldiers, and he is at the city gates." Mira felt Cale go very still beside her. Not the stillness of shock, but the focused motionlessness of a predator at full attention, his wolf processing threat assessments faster than his words could form. She looked at the window, at the city beyond the palace walls, the streets she had moved through invisibly for 4 years. 3,000 soldiers. She had not built a network for armies, but she had built something else. "How long until they breach the gates?" she asked the clerk. "They're not breaching, they're waiting." He sent a message. He held out a folded paper. Mira took it before Cale could. Read it. "Surrender the girl. Keep the crown." Cale read it twice. Then he looked up at her, and she saw something in his face she had not seen before, something that lived past the composure and the control and the practiced authority, something immediate and unguarded and entirely clear. "No," he said. Not a political calculation, not a strategic assessment, the word arriving with the particular certainty of something that had already been decided before the question was asked. And underneath it, barely controlled, she could see the wolf, amber eyes fully lit, jaw set, every line of him carrying the absolute refusal of an apex predator protecting something it had decided was its to protect. She held his gaze. It would solve everything, she said quietly, testing him. She needed to know. It would solve nothing. Completely even. And I won't do it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket and turned to the clerk. Tell me everything you know about Corvin, his habits, his loyalties, whether he actually believes in this cause or whether Davin handed it to him and he hasn't yet figured out he can put it down. The clerk blinked. Find out, she said. You have 1 hour. The standoff at the city gates lasted until midday. Cale handled it the way Mira had watched him handle everything since he had stopped performing kingship and started practicing it. Directly, without theater, with the authority of a man who had located what he was actually made of and found it sufficient. He walked to the gates himself. No army, no guard formation, no crown, because the crown was ceremonial and this wasn't a ceremony, just Cale, and all of what he was, which included the wolf, fully present and entirely unperformative in a way that was somehow more imposing than the crown had ever been. Corvin was a wolf too. He would know exactly what he was looking at across that gate. He would know it in his blood before his mind processed it. Corvin was 19 years old and inherited a cause he didn't fully understand from a grief-consumed man who had used him as an instrument. He looked at the king standing at the open gates, calm, certain, every inch the alpha that rumors said he was, and made the only calculation available to a young man who was not, at his core, committed to catastrophe. He surrendered the seal before the afternoon bells. The 3,000 soldiers went home. The city exhaled. Mira heard about it from Hesta, who delivered the news with the same unhurried certainty with which she delivered everything. She was sitting in her 12-foot room when Hesta told her, still sitting there an hour later, alone, with nothing required of her. The feeling was so unfamiliar she spent several minutes simply sitting inside it, cataloging its texture. Quiet. Still. The particular quality of air in a room after a long storm has passed and the walls have held. She looked around the space that had held 2 people through 18 days of something she didn't have a word for yet. The worn boards, the chest, the candle burned to a stub, the bookshelf that had been reorganized on day 1 and never fixed. She had not fixed it deliberately, she understood now. She wasn't sure when she had understood that. Outside, the palace moved through its ordinary rhythms, guards changing, servants crossing corridors, the endless machinery of a kingdom that was learning, slowly and imperfectly, to be something different from what it had been. She had been running, in one form or another, for as long as she could remember. She was not sure she remembered how to stand still, but she thought she might be willing to learn. The month that followed moved in 2 speeds simultaneously. Fast, in the council chambers, where Cale drove the reform agenda with a focused relentlessness that left the remaining council members very little room to breathe, and slow everywhere else, the palace recalibrating, the city learning, the particular difficult work of becoming different from what you have been. The Servant Protection Act, expanded Omega rights, prohibition of forced mating claims, not phased, not scheduled, not subject to any political timeline. Immediate. In the original language he had been softening for years to make it palatable, signed without apology or modification. He did not call it a triumph. In every session, every signing, every council discussion, he called it a beginning. The word was deliberate. Mira had been present when he chose it, and she had understood without it needing to be said that the word was addressed specifically to Lyria, to the gap between the act and the girl it would have saved, acknowledged publicly and without deflection every time the reforms were discussed. Not erased, named, made part of the official record of why the work existed. She thought that mattered more than people would expect it to. She had asked about Lyria on the 3rd day after the council session. Quietly, practically, not as emotional appeal, but as simple proposition. A name in the official palace record with full honors, the forced mating declared unlawful in the new statutes with Lyria's specific case cited, Her story made part of the public accounting of why the reforms existed and what the delay had cost. "It costs nothing material," she had said. One paragraph. Cale had said yes before she finished the sentence. The paragraph was written, the record amended. Somewhere in the eastern province, in a grave that had never been permitted a proper headstone because a lord had refused it out of spite, a woman's name was finally spoken by the kingdom that had failed to protect her. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Mira thought about that distinction often, how the smallest gestures of recognition could cost nothing materially and mean everything to anyone who had known the person being recognized, and how long it sometimes took the powerful to understand that meaning and material value were not the same currency. The day Cale signed the Servant Protection Act, he did it at a plain writing desk in a small anteroom with no ceremony and no audience, except Mira, sitting across from him with the witness register open in front of her. The clerk had started to object. Witnesses to royal signings were traditionally senior council members, traditionally many other things that Mira was not. Cale looked at the clerk with the specific patience of a man who had recently stopped having time for obstruction. The clerk found somewhere else to be. She signed her name in the witness column. Mira. No title, no rank, no designation beyond the name itself. In her careful handwriting. On a document that would be read for 100 years. She looked at it for a moment after the ink dried. She thought about her mother, about the window boxes and the herbs and the woman who sang while she worked and never had anyone move fast enough to save her. She thought she would have liked this. She thought she would have liked Cale, specifically, which was a thought she allowed herself to hold for a moment before setting it gently aside and returning to the work. 3 weeks after the gates, Cale came to her room. He knocked. She noticed that before she had consciously registered anything else. The deliberateness of it. A king who had spent 17 days living inside these 12 feet, who knew this room better than most rooms he had occupied in his life, standing in the corridor and knocking and waiting. Not assuming. Asking. She opened the door. He looked at her for a moment in the corridor light with the expression she had come to know. The look of a man choosing his words with the care of someone who had learned that words deployed carelessly could cost years and people and things that could not be recovered. Then he came in and sat on the floor. Her floor. The same boards, the same position, back against the foot of her narrow bed, long legs crossed at the ankle, like the room remembered him and had kept his shape in reserve. She sat in her chair. The room settled around them both like something recognizing itself. She waited. "What did you say your dream was?" he said. Quietly, like a question he had been carrying for 3 weeks and had decided today was finally the day to set it down. "A window and a garden." She went very still. "There's a room in the East Wing," he said. "Empty for years. Nobody uses it because it faces the back of the palace and the garden outside has gone completely wild. Honestly, there are things growing in there that I'm not certain anyone can identify anymore." Something shifted in his expression. Warmer, less careful, more like the man she had known in the dark of this room than the king the palace saw in its corridors. "But the window is extraordinary. Best light in the building. Morning sun from the 6th bell onward." A pause. "I thought, if you wanted it, it's yours. The room. The garden, such as it is." Another pause. Shorter, more deliberate. "And I thought, if you'd let me, I'd very much like to visit." Not a command, not a claiming, not the transaction of power moving down its natural gradient. An asking. The room was quiet around them. Outside, the palace moved through its rhythms. Guards changing, servants crossing corridors, the endless machinery of a kingdom learning slowly and imperfectly to be something better. The same sounds she had cataloged for 4 years. They felt different now. She looked at the floor that had held them both, at the chest with everything folded precisely inside it, at the wall where the window wasn't. She looked at him, at this man who had come through her door bleeding and afraid, and had spent 17 days learning to be honest, who had stood at a city gate without a crown and refused to give her up, who had signed reforms with her name as witness and called it a beginning, and meant it. A man whose wolf had spent 17 days in a 12-foot room choosing every day to be still, to listen, to follow, the most alpha thing she had ever watched him do. "You can visit," she said. Something released in his face, some sustained, careful tension she had watched him carry since the first night, released all at once and completely. "But knock first," she said. He laughed. It filled the room entirely, full, unguarded, completely real. The laugh of a man who had been handed back something he had quietly made peace with losing. She had never heard him laugh like that. Not in 18 days of close quarters, not in a month of aftermath and counsels and carefully worded documents. She thought she could probably spend a considerable amount of time getting used to it. The room had never felt small to her. She had told herself that for 4 years and believed it less each time. Now, with the sound of that laugh still moving through the walls, it felt exactly right. Not too large, not too small. Enough. For the first time, completely and without qualification, enough. She was still looking at him, still carrying the warmth of it, when her eyes moved with the automatic vigilance of a woman who had spent 4 years listening for danger, to the folded paper Hesta had slipped under her door that morning, the one she hadn't opened yet. She picked it up now, unfolded it, read it, once. The warmth shifted. She read it again, more slowly, making sure she had understood every word correctly. She had. "Cale," she said quietly. Something in her voice brought him to his feet immediately. She held the paper out. He took it. She watched his expression move through the account and knew the exact moment he reached the last line, because his jaw tightened in the way it did when he was holding something very large, very still. His eyes had gone amber bright again, the wolf fully present, reading threat in the document the way it read threat in a room. The paper was from Aldrich, a second transfer order, older than Davin's conspiracy, predating it by 18 months, written in a different hand, bearing a seal that should not have existed, belonging to a council member who had died 2 years ago. Which meant someone had been building this long before Davin, which meant Davin had not been the architect. He had been the instrument. Someone had found a broken father and handed him the architecture of revenge, had supplied the forgeries, the paid witnesses, the procedural roadmap for installing a puppet king, had used Davin's grief as a weapon the way you use any tool, efficiently, without sentimentality, and with the full intention of walking away clean when the work was done. Cale looked up from the paper. His eyes met hers. "It's not over," she said. He folded the paper carefully, set it on the chest, looked at the room, the 12 feet of it, the worn boards, the window that faced a wall, and then looked at her with the same clarity she had seen on the first night, except now there was no fear in it. Just the two of them, and the truth of what they had already survived, and the shape of what was still ahead. "No," he said. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not urgently, deliberately, like a choice being made in full knowledge of what it meant. "We've handled worse," he said. She looked at their joined hands. She thought about the wrong door and the 12-foot room and the map on the floor and candle burned to nothing and her name in the witness column and a garden that needed considerable work. "Yes," she said, "we have." A beat of quiet between them. Then she turned the paper over in her other hand, Aldrich's note beneath the transfer order, 3 lines she had read past in the shock of the document itself. She read them now. Her hand tightened in Cale's. "There's more," she said. He looked at her. Aldrich cross-referenced the seal, she said. The dead council member, Lord Parrot. He didn't die of illness. A pause that lasted the length of a breath. The physician who signed his death record also signed Lyria's. The room was very still. The same physician, she said. Both deaths. Both convenient, both quiet. Cale's face had gone still in the way that meant something behind it was moving very fast. Someone has been doing this for years, she said. And they're still here, he said. Still on the council, she confirmed. Aldrich found a name. She held up the paper. At the bottom of Aldrich's note, in his careful scribe's handwriting, underlined twice, a name. A name that Mira recognized because she had cleaned that man's office every third morning for 4 years, had refilled his oil lamps and carried his correspondence, and stood invisible in his doorway while he conducted business he believed no one important was witnessing. A name that Cale recognized because that man had sat on the council through his father's reign and his own, had voted in favor of every reform, had attended every session with the unhurried confidence of a man who had nothing to hide, because he had hidden everything so well that hiding had become invisible. Lord Cassian Vere. A man who had handed Davin the blueprint and stepped back into the shadows and watched the king he had maneuvered nearly fall, and who was, Mira looked at the bottom of the paper where Aldrich had added one final line in handwriting less careful than the rest, the handwriting of a man writing quickly, writing frightened. He knows I found it. I've been followed for 2 days. He knows about Mira, too. Tale looked up. Where is Aldrich now? He asked. Mira was already at the door. They found him in the lower corridor near the records hall. Alive, barely, pressed into a doorway alcove, white-faced and shaking, with the specific look of a man who has understood for 2 days that his life depends on reaching the right person before the wrong person reaches him. He grabbed Mira's arm before she had finished crossing the corridor. He sent someone for the original documents this morning, Aldrich said, his voice barely controlled. The ones I kept separate, the real records, not copies, originals with his actual seal and his actual handwriting and dates going back 11 years. 11 years. Mira looked at Kael. Before Davin, she said. Before Lyria, Kael confirmed. His voice had gone to the place she recognized. Past shock into the cold precision of a man doing the only thing available to him. His wolf was tracking the corridor around them. She could see it in the way his attention divided, monitoring threats in 4 directions simultaneously. How many? She asked Aldrich. Aldrich looked at her, at Kael, back at her. At least 6, he said. 6 situations like Lyria's. 6 people in the way of something he wanted. 6 quiet deaths with clean paperwork. A silence that had no bottom to it. Where are the original documents now? Kael asked. Aldrich reached inside his coat. He pressed them into Mira's hands. Not Kael's. Hers. She understood why without needing it explained. She was the one who had built the system that could move these safely. She was the one with the network, the routes, the knowledge of which corridors were watched and which ones were forgotten. She was the one the palace had never thought to account for. She tucked the documents flat against her body beneath her apron and looked at Kael. I need 2 hours, she said. I'll go with you. You can't. You'll be recognized. You'll draw attention to exactly what we're moving. She held his gaze. Trust me completely. You said you could. His wolf didn't want to let her go alone. She could see that clearly. Every line of him carrying the particular tension of a predator being asked to hold still while something it wanted to protect moved into potential danger. He held still anyway. Yes, he said. She moved. 2 hours later, she was back. The documents were with Hesta, in the one location in the palace that no one with power had ever thought to consider significant, tucked behind a loose stone in the linen room that Hesta had known about for 30 years and had told no one. Safe, recoverable, witnessed by 6 people who would each confirm their existence independently. She returned to the room where Cale was waiting, standing at the window, looking out at the wall that blocked the view, hands still at his sides, and told him it was done. He turned around. She saw on his face the complete version of the expression she had been watching arrive in pieces for 30 days. Something open, unguarded, entirely present. The face of a man who was no longer performing anything. The wolf and the man, together, finally occupying the same space without conflict. "We need to move on him tonight," she said, "before he realizes the documents are secured." "I know. I know how to do this part." "I know you do," she said. Something passed between them in the quiet of the room. The specific understanding of 2 people who have been through enough together that communication has become efficient in a way it only gets when trust is complete. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. They took him before the midnight bell. The evidence was presented to the 3 council members Mira had identified as genuinely uncorrupted. Not the loudest, not the most powerful, but the 3 whose hands were clean and whose records Aldrich had confirmed contained no connection to the shadow that had been operating inside the council for 11 years. The man's name was Lord Cassian Vere, 60 years old, impeccable reputation. The kind of man who had built his safety on being considered above suspicion so thoroughly that suspicion had never once reached him. He looked at Mira when they brought him into the anteroom. Not at Cale, not at the council members, not at the documents spread across the table. At Mira. "The maid," he said quietly, with something that was almost admiration. "4 years. I never once thought to watch the maid." His eyes moved to Cale then, and something in them shifted, something old and complicated that was not quite remorse and not quite defiance. "I always wondered," Vere said quietly, "what it would take." "To be caught?" asked Cale. "To be stopped," Vere said. And in the smallest room adjacent to the council chamber, plain table, single candle, documents that survived 11 years of careful burial, Lord Cassian Vere finally ran out of darkness to stand in. The morning after Vere's arrest, the palace woke different. Not quieter, louder actually. The corridors filling with the specific noise of people processing a shock they hadn't known was coming. Lords moving in clusters, council members speaking in doorways with the urgent, slightly panicked energy of people reassessing every alliance they had built over the past decade. Mira moved through all of it the way she always had. Invisible, unhurried, listening. Except that she wasn't invisible anymore. Not entirely. She could feel it. The difference in the quality of attention paid to her in corridors, the small hesitations when she entered rooms, the way certain eyes tracked her movement and then looked away too deliberately. The maid who had walked into the council chamber, the maid who had read letters to powerful men and not looked at the floor. The palace didn't know what to do with her yet. She could feel it deciding. She returned to her room at midday to find a sealed letter under the door. No insignia, her name on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, read it once, set it on the chest, sat down on the floor, her floor, the worn boards, and stared at it for a long time. The letter was from a woman named Sereth. 3 sentences. No salutation, no signature beyond a single initial. "You have made yourself visible. That was either very brave or very foolish, and I have not yet decided which. There are others who have been waiting for someone to be visible first. Come to the lower east garden at the 4th bell if you want to know who they are." Mira read it 3 more times. She knew the lower east garden, a neglected space between the servants' wing and the outer wall, off the main routes, unlikely to be watched by anyone who mattered. She also knew that it was the kind of location a person chose when they wanted a meeting that didn't appear on any record, which meant whoever Sereth was, she understood the palace the same way Mira did, from the bottom. She left the letter on the chest and went to find Cale. Not because she needed his permission, because she had made a decision 30 days ago, in the worst night of the worst week of her life, that going alone was finished. She found him in the small council anteroom where he had been working since dawn. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face shifted. The specific softening that happened now when he saw her, that she had watched arrive gradually over 30 days and had stopped pretending not to notice. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. His expression moved through it carefully. "Sereth," he said. "You know the name?" "I know of a Sereth. She was a senior council advisor 15 years ago, one of the few women to hold the position. She resigned without explanation during my father's reign." He set the letter down. No one knew why. She simply disappeared from the official record. Mira looked at the letter. "She didn't disappear," she said. "She went somewhere no one thought to look." A pause. "The servants' network," Cale said. "I think so." His wolf had gone very alert in the way she had learned to read. Not threat, but heightened attention. The particular quality of a predator that has caught a scent it recognizes as significant without yet knowing why. "I'm going with you," he said. This time, she didn't argue. The lower east garden was more overgrown than Mira remembered. Knee-high grass pushing through the stone pathways, ivy consuming the far wall with the patient ambition of something that had been left alone long enough to believe the space was its own. Sereth was already there. 60s, silver-haired, dressed in servant gray, carrying herself with the particular contained authority of someone who had possessed significant power, set it down voluntarily, and never fully lost the bearing it had built into her bones. She looked at Mira first, then at Cale, and something moved through her expression, complicated and unreadable. "You brought the king," she said. "He comes with me now," Mira said simply. Sereth studied her for a moment. Then, something that might have been approval crossed her face. "Sit down," she said. "What I'm going to tell you is going to take a while, and some of it is going to make you angry, and I need you to hear all of it before you react to any of it." She looked at Cale specifically when she said that last part. He sat down on the stone bench across from her. Mira sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. Beside her, she felt the wolf in him go very still, listening, not just with his ears. Sereth had been building her own network for 15 years. Not the same as Mira's, broader, older, reaching into places that Mira's 4-year operation hadn't yet touched. Former council staff who had left service under suspicious circumstances. Servants who had been dismissed without cause after witnessing things they weren't supposed to see. Omegas who had escaped forced bonds and rebuilt lives in the palace's invisible margins. 47 people. All of them connected, all of them quiet, all of them waiting. "Waiting for what?" Cale asked. Sereth looked at him steadily. "For a king who deserved to be told the truth," she said. "I've been in this palace since before you were born. I served your grandfather. I served your father." A pause with weight in it. "I watched what this palace does to people who try to change it from the inside without support." "You resigned," Mira said. "I was given a choice." Sereth's voice was even. "Resign quietly or be destroyed loudly. Vare made the offer personally." She looked at her hands. "I chose survival. I have not always been at peace with that choice." Silence. "What changed?" Cale asked. Sereth looked at Mira. She walked into the council chamber in a maid's uniform and didn't look at the floor. The 47 people in Sereth's network had, between them, 11 years of documented evidence against Vare, not just the 6 deaths Aldrich had identified. 14. 14 people who had been in the way of something Vare wanted. Council positions, land rights, legal decisions, the carefully maintained architecture of influence he had been building since before Cale's father took the throne, and who had died quietly, cleanly, with impeccable paperwork, and a physician who signed everything without being asked twice. Sira sat in the overgrown garden and listened to Sereth lay it out with the methodical precision of a woman who had been organizing this information for a decade and a half. She thought about Lyria, about the way one death, named publicly, had cracked the council chamber open, about 14 more names, 14 more people who had died in the gap between power and accountability, who had never been spoken in any official room, whose stories had been filed away in the palace's vast archive of convenient forgetting. "They need to be named," she said. Sereth looked at her. "All of them," Mira said. "Every single one, in the official record, with full accounts." A pause. "That will take months," Cale said quietly. "Yes," she said. "It will." They met with Sereth's network over 3 evenings, small groups, different locations, always in the spaces that power forgot to watch. Mira moved through small and felt something she hadn't expected. Recognition. Not of faces, most of these people she had never met, but of the specific quality of their attention, the way they carried themselves in rooms, the practiced unremarkability that she understood from the inside as something built deliberately over years of necessary survival. These were people who had been doing what she had done, watching, listening, remembering, waiting, from before she arrived, some of them for decades. On the 3rd evening, she sat with Kael afterward in the anteroom that had become their working space. Maps and documents spread across the table, candles burning in multiples now because they were no longer rationing, and said something she had been forming slowly for days. "The reforms aren't enough," she said. He looked up. "The laws are necessary, they're not sufficient." She chose her words carefully. "You can change what's legal. You can't change what's invisible unless you make it visible." These people, Sereth's network, the servants, the Omegas, they've been holding this palace together for generations, and the palace has never once admitted it. Kael set down his pen. "What are you proposing?" he asked. She told him. It took an hour. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was his way of indicating that what was being said mattered enough to receive completely before responding. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "A formal advisory council," he said, "drawn from the servant and Omega communities, with actual authority, not ceremonial, not consultative, binding input on legislation affecting their welfare." "Yes." "The noble houses will object." "The noble houses have been destabilizing this palace for generations," she said. "They've just been doing it quietly enough that it looked like governance." He looked at the documents spread between them, at the 14 names on Sereth's list, at the evidence of 11 years of careful, patient, invisible destruction. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," he said again, more simply. "Let's build it." Something warm and complicated moved through her chest. She looked down at the documents before he could see it in her face. She wasn't entirely sure she succeeded. Vere's trial took 3 weeks. It was the most heavily attended council proceeding in the palace's recent memory. Lords and ladies filling the chamber to capacity, the corridors outside packed with servants and common citizens who had never before been permitted to witness such proceedings, and who Cale had, with a single written order, allowed entry to the public gallery that had been sealed for 40 years. The gallery was full before the first session began. Mira sat in it. Not at the front. She had been offered a position at the council table as a formal witness and had declined. She needed to watch from the gallery. She needed to be in the room the way she had always been in rooms, able to see everything, the full picture, without being at the center of it. She was still learning, she had told Cale, how to be visible without losing the perspective that invisibility had given her. He had looked at her for a moment. "Don't lose it," he had said. "It's the most valuable thing you have." She had not told him that the most valuable thing she currently had was considerably more complicated to categorize. Veer did not deny it. That surprised the chamber. That surprised everyone. He sat at the center of the room with his impeccable posture and his 60 years and the specific weariness of a man who had been maintaining a performance for so long that the end of it was, at least partially, a relief. And he confirmed everything. Every name, every death, every decision made and unmade from the shadows. He spoke about it the way a man speaks about work he believed in, not with guilt, not with defiance, but with the flat exhaustion of someone who had operated according to a logic that had seemed coherent from the inside and was only now, in the full light of a room full of witnesses, revealing itself as monstrous. "I believed I was maintaining stability," he said at one point. "I believed the kingdom required a certain kind of order, and that certain bloodlines, certain kinds of power, were incompatible with that order. History had proven it. The War of the Divided Throne, 200 years of conflict that nearly destroyed this kingdom. I had read the records. I knew what happened when multiple claims competed for the same crown." "So you killed people," Cale said. "I prevented what I believed would be a catastrophe," Veer said, without apology, without performance, just the terrible clarity of a man who had been certain for so long that certainty had become its own kind of blindness. 14 people, Cale said. 14 people were your prevention. Veer looked at him. "Yes," he said. The 14 names were read into the official record on the final day of the trial. Every one of them, by name, by account, by the specific circumstances of their deaths and the positions they had held, and the things they had been trying to change before they were stopped. Cale read them himself. He had insisted on that. These were deaths that happened during his reign and his father's reign, under governance he had inherited and was responsible for continuing or transforming. The names needed to be spoken by the person who held the authority that had failed to protect them. It took 40 minutes. The chamber did not move. When he had finished, he set down the document and looked up at the gallery. He found her face in the crowd. She held his gaze for a moment, just long enough to communicate something that had no clean language yet, something that lived in the territory between recognition and gratitude, and the specific warmth of two people who had built their own private vocabulary of meaning in the spaces between words. Then she looked back at the 14 names on the page, and he returned to the work. There was sentenced to permanent exile. Not execution, which had been the council's initial recommendation, but permanent removal from the kingdom and the erasure of his name from all official records except one, the one that named what he had done, which would outlast him by centuries. Mira had not advocated for the sentence specifically, but when Cale had asked her privately what she thought justice looked like in this case, she had said, "Make sure he knows that the thing he spent his life building, his reputation, his legacy, the version of himself that looked trustworthy, is the first thing gone, not the last." He had looked at her for a long moment. "You're extraordinarily good at this," he said. She had felt the warmth of that move through her chest and chosen, for once, not to immediately redirect it into something practical. "I know," she said. He had laughed. That laugh, the full one, the one she had decided she would never stop finding remarkable. "Good," he said. "Stop pretending otherwise." She had almost said something then. Almost. The advisory council was announced 6 weeks after the trial. 12 members, drawn from servant communities, Omega advocacy groups, common citizen representatives, and former palace staff who had left service under circumstances now recognized as politically motivated. Sareth accepted the chairmanship. She had been quiet about it when Cal offered, not humble, but genuinely considering, turning the decision over in the specific way of someone who had spent 15 years wondering if the thing they gave up was worth what they had preserved by giving it up. Then she had said yes. With, Mira thought, the look of a woman who had finally found the thing she had been waiting 15 years to do. The noble houses reacted as predicted. Outrage, procedural objections, 3 formal challenges filed within the first week. Cal handled each one with the focused patience of a man who had spent 30 days in a 12-foot room learning that patience was its own form of power. The challenges failed. The council met for the first time on a Tuesday morning in a room that had previously been used for storing ceremonial armor. Mira was there. Not as a member, she had declined that too. She was there as herself, sitting in the back of the room, watching 12 people who had spent their lives being looked past take their places at a table that was finally theirs. Afterward, she walked to the East Wing. She had been avoiding it. Not deliberately, more the avoidance of someone who keeps finding other things to do when approaching a particular direction, who circles rather than arrives, who hasn't yet decided if being ready is a thing that happens or a thing you choose. The room was at the end of the corridor. She stood outside the door for a moment. Then she opened it. The window was everything he had said. Morning light. It was past morning now, closer to midday, but the angle was still extraordinary, the light coming through in the specific way that happens when a window faces the right direction and the glass is old and slightly imperfect and makes the light do things that new glass doesn't. She stood in it for a long time without moving. The garden below was, as advertised, a disaster, wildly, enthusiastically overgrown, things growing through other things, a stone path completely consumed, something flowering in the far corner in a color she didn't have a name for. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the flower in the far corner more carefully. Small, white, growing on a climbing vine that had consumed the entire far wall. Her mother had drawn that flower, hundreds of times in the margins of recipes, on scraps of paper, on the edge of the kitchen windowsill in a village 2 days east, over and over, without ever naming it. Mira stood in the window light and looked at the flower her mother had drawn and felt something moved through her chest that she didn't have words for yet. She heard the knock before she had fully processed that she was going to stay. 3 deliberate knocks. Patient, waiting. She turned from the window. "Come in," she said. Cale opened the door. He stood in the doorframe for a moment, taking in the room, the light, the wild garden below, and her, standing in the middle of it with something in her face that she wasn't attempting to arrange into anything other than what it was. "You're here," he said. "I'm here." He came in, looked at the window, looked at the garden, looked at her. "I didn't expect you so soon," he said. "I thought you'd wait another week, circle it a few more times." "I would have," she said, "but I decided to stop waiting for ready and just arrive." Something moved through his expression, warm and entirely present. "That's a significant change of strategy," he said. "I've been known to adapt," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the look she had stopped being able to pretend she didn't recognize, the one that had been building since day one in increments too small to name individually, but unmistakable in aggregate. He took one step toward her and stopped. "I want to ask you something," he said. His voice had shifted, still even, but with the specific quality it got when he was choosing words with the full weight of what they meant. "Ask," she said. "I want to ask in a way that makes it entirely clear that the answer no is available to you. Not as a theory, not as a polite gesture. Actually available, with no consequence and no change to anything between us if that's what you choose." She looked at him. "You've been practicing that," she said. "Since approximately day 4, he admitted. She felt the laugh arrive before she could stop it. Small, involuntary, entirely real. Ask, she said again. He crossed the remaining distance between them, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The room, which was considerably larger than the one they had shared for 17 days, suddenly felt approximately the same size. I would like to be here, with you, not as your king, not as a political arrangement, just as this. He indicated the space between them, which was not very much space. Whatever this is, which I think we both know has a name, and I think we've both been not saying it for a while now. The light came through the window between them. The garden rioted quietly below. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the wrong door and the 12 feet and the rules she had given him on the first morning and the way he had looked at her on the floor of that room, like she was worth seeing, like the seeing was the point. She thought about his hands around hers in the dark after Ferris left, about the map between them, knee to knee in the candlelight, about a wolf who had spent 17 days in a 12-foot room choosing every single day to be still, about a man who had come through the wrong door with everything stripped away and had become, in the losing of all of it, the most honest version of himself she had ever watched anyone become. She had been falling for that version since approximately day 2. She had been not saying it since approximately day 3. I know what it's called, she said. So do I, he said. A pause. You knocked, she said. I knocked, he confirmed. Good, she said, and she closed the remaining distance herself. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined it might be, which was not to say it was disappointing, but that it was so entirely itself, so specific to the two of them and this room and the light through this particular window, that none of the imagined versions had come close. He held her like she was something he had been careful with for a long time, and was now, with permission granted and confirmed, allowing himself to hold without reservation, both hands, one at her waist and one at the back of her head, his forehead dropping to hers when they broke apart, both of them breathing slightly differently than before. The wolf in him was very quiet, not suppressed, settled, the particular quality she had been watching him work toward for weeks, the wolf and the man occupying the same space without conflict, without the coiled tension of competing imperatives. Just present. Just here. I've been wanting to do that since day 9, he said. Day 9, she repeated. The night you told me about the noble's arm in the corridor. You said it so plainly, so completely without self-pity, just a fact about the world you had navigated and what it had cost you. A pause. I thought, I have never in my life been told the truth that directly by someone who had every reason to protect themselves by softening it. Day 4, she said. He looked at her. For me, it was day 4, when you ate the bread. He stared at her. You ate bread? You ate it like someone who just remembered that ordinary things were still allowed to matter, she said. Yes, the weeks that followed were the strangest of Mira's life. Not difficult, or not only difficult, strange in the specific way of someone whose entire framework for existing in the world is shifting under them, and who keeps reaching for the familiar handhold of invisibility and finding it no longer fits their hand the way it used to. She was visible now. Not famous, not the kind of visible that required ceremony or titles, but known. Present in rooms that had previously excluded her, not by explicit rule, but by the accumulated assumption that she didn't belong in them. It was disorienting. She said that to Cale one evening, sitting in the east room with the garden dark below them and a second candle burning. She had stopped rationing them, which was a small change that felt, inexplicably, significant. Disorienting, he repeated. Not unwelcome? Both, she said, at the same time. I keep waiting for someone to notice I'm in the room and tell me to leave. Does anyone? She considered. No. Does that help? Slowly, she said. Yes, slowly. He nodded. He understood slowly, too. He had been learning it himself, the specific work of a wolf who had spent years suppressing what he perceived because the court found it inconvenient, learning instead to simply be what he was in a room without apology. They were both, she thought, learning to take up their correct amount of space. The garden took 3 weeks of work before she could identify where the path had been. She did it herself, in the early mornings before the day's obligations began, in the specific quiet of an hour that belonged to no one's schedule and nothing's agenda. Cale appeared on the 4th morning, without announcement, in old clothes, carrying a second pair of gloves. She looked at him. He shrugged. "I have an hour," he said. She handed him a section of path. They worked in silence, companionable, unhurried, the kind of silence that only exists between people who have already said everything important and know they can return to it any time. "The flower in the corner," she said. She had been waiting for the right moment. He looked up. "My mother used to draw it hundreds of times in the margins of everything. I never knew what it was. I never thought to ask." He set down his tools, looked at the vine in the corner with its small white flowers, and then looked at her with the specific attention of a man who understood that she was telling him something that mattered. "We'll find out what it is," he said. "I know," she said. She picked up her tools again. She thought about a mother who had drawn that flower over and over without explanation, who had sent her daughter toward a palace she had never seen, toward a garden she had never described. She thought, she knew. 3 months after the trial, Sareth requested a private meeting. She arrived at the East Room in the evening, looked at the visible progress in the garden below with something that might have been satisfaction, and sat across from Mira and Cale with the particular expression of a woman who has been carrying information and has decided the time for carrying it has ended. "There's something I didn't tell you in the garden," she said. Mira looked at her. "About why I resigned 15 years ago." Sareth folded her hands in her lap. "Vare made me an offer. Resign or be destroyed. I told you that." She paused. "What I didn't tell you is what he threatened me with specifically." "Tell me now," Cale said quietly. Sareth looked at him, then at Mira. "He had documents," she said. "Records from your father's administration, a project your father approved quietly, a systematic survey of Omega bloodlines across the 5 provinces." The room was very still. "He was looking for something specific," Sareth said, "a particular bloodline, old, connected to the kingdom's founding." Mira's hands went still on the table. "He found it," Sareth said. "He just never found the person." She looked at Mira. "Until now." The silence lasted a long time. Mira looked at her own hands on the table, at the calluses from years of work, the small scar on her right index finger. Ordinary hands, entirely ordinary. "Tell me what you mean," she said. Sareth reached into her coat and produced a folded document, old, the paper discolored at the edges, the kind of old that meant decades, not years. She laid it on the table. "Your mother didn't just flee the old king's claiming," Sareth said quietly. "She fled because she knew what he would do when he found out what she carried, not who she was, what ran in her blood." "She was an Omega," Mira said. "She was an Omega descended from the founding line, the original bloodline that established this kingdom, the one that carries a claim to this throne that predates any noble house, predates the current dynasty itself." Cale had gone very still beside her. His wolf was fully alert. She could feel it in the air between them, that particular quality of heightened attention that she had learned to recognize. Mira looked at the document. "I never knew," she said. "She was protecting you," Sareth said simply. "She knew if you knew, you might try to claim it, and claiming it would have killed you." She thought about the flower her mother had drawn over and over her whole life, a flower that grew in founding-era royal gardens. She had been leaving breadcrumbs all along. Mira picked up the document, read it. A genealogical record, meticulous, annotated, names going back generations, bloodlines traced with the thoroughness of someone who needed to be certain. At the bottom, circled in faded ink, a name she recognized. Her mother's name. Her mother's mother's name. And above that, names she didn't recognize, stretching back further than she had ever thought to look. She set the document down, looked at Cale. His expression was entirely open. No performance, no political assessment, just him, looking at her, waiting. "Say what you're thinking," she said. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that you have spent your entire life being told you are nobody, and it turns out you are so far from nobody that the most powerful men in this kingdom have either been hunting you or protecting you since before you were born." A pause. "And I'm thinking that doesn't change a single thing about who you are. You are exactly who you were in that 12-foot room. The document doesn't add to that." "No," she said, "but it does mean something about what choices are available to me, if I want them." She looked at the document again, at her mother's name circled in faded ink, at a woman who had spent her whole life running towards something she made sure her daughter would find. "What choices?" he asked carefully. Sarath laid it out plainly. The founding bloodline carried, under the kingdom's original charter, a document that predated the current dynasty by 200 years and had been deliberately obscured from common knowledge but never legally nullified, a co-sovereign claim. Not a competing claim, a co-sovereign one. Meaning the throne of Dravos, under its original constitution, was designed to be held jointly. Two bloodlines, two authorities, checks and balances built into the founding document by people who had understood, 2 centuries ago, that singular power without counterbalance was a structure that eventually destroyed itself. The dynasty spent 2 centuries pretending that clause didn't exist. There had spent 11 years killing anyone who got close to knowing it did. He had read the history, the War of the Divided Throne, 2 centuries of conflict. He had drawn the wrong conclusion from the right evidence. The war had not happened because 2 bloodlines shared power. It had happened because one bloodline tried to eliminate the other. He wasn't protecting the throne from instability, Cale said, the understanding arriving in his voice with the specific quality of something clicking into place. He was protecting the dynasty's monopoly on authority, and he used a historical war as his justification, a war caused by the very thing he was doing. "Yes," Sarath said. Mira looked at the garden below the window, at the white flowers in the corner that her mother had drawn her whole life, pointing toward this room, toward this moment, toward a truth she had spent her life keeping safe. "What choices?" he asked carefully. Sarath laid it out plainly. The founding bloodline carried, under the kingdom's original charter, a document that predated the current dynasty by 200 years, and had been deliberately obscured from common knowledge, but never legally nullified, a co-sovereign claim, meaning the throne of Dravos, under its original constitution, was designed to be held jointly, 2 bloodlines, 2 authorities, checks and balances built into the founding document by people who had understood, 2 centuries ago, that singular power without counterbalance was a structure that eventually destroyed itself. The dynasty spent 2 centuries pretending that clause didn't exist. There had spent 11 years killing anyone who got close to knowing it did. He had read the history, the War of the Divided Throne, 2 centuries of conflict. He had drawn the wrong conclusion from the right evidence. The war had not happened because 2 bloodlines shared power. It had happened because one bloodline tried to eliminate the other. He wasn't protecting the throne from instability, Kale said, the understanding arriving in his voice with the specific quality of something clicking into place. He was protecting the dynasty's monopoly on authority, and he used a historical war as his justification, a war caused by the very thing he was doing. Yes, Seroth said. Mira looked at the garden below the window, at the white flowers in the corner that her mother had drawn her whole life, pointing toward this room, toward this moment, toward a truth she had spent her life keeping safe. "I don't want a throne," she said, "but I want the clause reinstated, because hiding it is how they kept the power concentrated, and concentrated power, in this kingdom, kills people." The announcement took 2 weeks to prepare. The noble houses had their predictable reaction: outrage, formal objections, 3 emergency sessions called to challenge the constitutional validity of a document that had been valid for 200 years and simply inconvenient to acknowledge. Kale handled each challenge. Mira spent those 2 weeks in the garden. Sereth found her there on the 5th morning, hands in the dirt, the path now fully recovered, and a section of the far wall cleared enough to see what had been growing there undisturbed for what looked like decades. The white flowering vine, fully revealed now, covering the entire far wall. The head groundskeeper stood looking at it for a long moment. "It was considered sacred," he said finally, "in the founding era. They planted it in royal gardens. It was called the covenant flower. It represented the agreement between the 2 founding bloodlines." He paused. "I've only ever seen it described in old texts. I didn't know it still existed anywhere." Mira looked at it for a long time. She thought about her mother drawing it over and over, without explanation, across years and provinces and desperate circumstances, keeping it present, keeping it alive on paper the way the plant had kept itself alive in this forgotten corner of the palace. "Leave it," she said. She picked up her tools and kept working. The public announcement was made on a Thursday morning in the main courtyard, outside, in a space where anyone in the palace could stand and listen. Kale read the announcement himself. He told them about the founding charter, the full version, in language accessible to everyone present. He named the 14 names again, as he would at every significant occasion for the rest of his reign, because these names were the reason the work existed and should be present every time the work was declared to be continuing. Then he said Mira's name. He said it simply, directly, as a fact about the world that he was making part of the official record. He told them who she was, not only the founding bloodline, but who she was, what she had built in 4 years of invisible work, what that work had cost, and what it had saved. The courtyard was absolutely silent throughout. Then Mira stepped forward. She stood before the full gathering and felt the familiar terror arrive, the same fear, the same specific weight of a woman who had built her survival on not being seen, now standing in front of more people than she had ever faced. She felt it fully, and she didn't let it turn her around. She spoke about the advisory council in practical terms, what it was for, what it would do, how it would function. She spoke about the servants who had built the intelligence that brought Vare down, naming every one of them publicly and fully. She finished to a courtyard that received her, not unanimously, but underneath the resistance, that same current she had felt before. Something that felt unmistakably like relief. Hesta found her afterward, moving against the dispersing crowd with the unhurried purpose of a woman who had been navigating palace crowds since before most of the people present were born. She pressed something into Mira's hand, a small piece of cloth, folded. Mira opened it. Inside, a key, old, iron, worn smooth at the grip from decades of use. She looked at Hesta. "Not your room," Hesta said. "The linen room, third shelf from the bottom, behind the loose stone." A pause. "I've been keeping something there besides documents." "For how long?" "Since your second week here," Hesta said. "When I figured out what you were doing and decided to help you without telling you I was helping you, because you were the kind of person who would have refused help, and I was the kind of person who gave it anyway." Mira stared at her. "Go look," Hesta said, "when you have a moment." Then she disappeared back into the crowd with the practiced invisibility of a woman who had been moving through palace spaces unnoticed for 40 years. Mira looked at the key in her hand. Then she looked back at the courtyard where Kale had been standing. He was watching her from across the square. She held up the key. He raised an eyebrow. She shook her head. Later. And he nodded. And even from across the courtyard she could see the slight movement in his face that she had learned to read as the small, private version of the full laugh. The linen room was empty when she got there. Third shelf from the bottom, loose stone, third from the left. She found it by touch, the slight give, the different resistance of a stone that had been moved many times over many years. Behind it, a box, plain wood, latched, small enough to hold in one hand. She brought it to the east room, set it on the table, opened it. Inside, letters, 24 of them, bound with a piece of ribbon that had once been blue and was now something closer to gray. The handwriting on the top envelope made her breath stop. She knew that handwriting. She had not seen it in 15 years, but she knew it the way you know things that were written into you before you had language for the knowing. In your body, somewhere below thought. Her mother's handwriting. Her name in her mother's hand. For Mira, when it's safe. She sat down on the floor, her instinct still when the world became larger than she knew how to hold standing up, and held the bundle in her lap. Through the window, visible now that she had cleared the near wall, the covenant flower moved faintly in the evening air. She sat with the letters for a long time before she opened the first one. The letters were dated over a span of 8 years. Her mother had begun writing them when Mira was 11, just after the illness that had not been an illness, in the months when she had understood that she was running out of time and had not yet been found. Some of them were practical, instruction, information about the bloodline, the founding charter, the things she had spent her life hiding and why, written with the specific care of a woman who needed her daughter to understand something she might never be there to explain. She had known about the garden flower. She had described the flower in one letter, careful and precise. "If you find it, you are in the right place. I drew it for you so you would recognize it when you arrived. I could not tell you why. I needed you to find it yourself, when it was safe, when you were ready." She had been navigating her daughter toward this room for 15 years, across provinces and years and desperate circumstances, without ever being able to explain why. Some of the letters were not practical at all. Some of them were just her mother's voice. "I am sorry I could not give you a room with a window. I tried." Mira pressed her hand flat against the letter. Outside, the garden, the flower her mother had drawn her toward. She sat on the floor of the room that was finally, actually hers, and read her mother's voice for the first time in 15 years. She did not try to be quiet about the crying. She was still sitting on the floor when Kale knocked. 3 knocks. Patient. Waiting. "Come in," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. He came in and took one look at her, the letters in her lap, her face, the particular quality of the silence in the room, and sat down on the floor beside her without asking a single question. He didn't put his arm around her, didn't try to fix it or explain it or move it toward resolution. He just sat there, present, steady, holding the space with her without requiring her to perform anything in return. His wolf was calm, that specific, settled quality she had come to recognize, not suppressed, not performing calm, but genuinely present without agenda. The wolf that had spent 17 days in a 12-foot room choosing stillness, choosing to follow, choosing to trust, now sitting on her floor in the same posture it had learned there. She had been alone with hard things for so long that the presence of someone willing to simply sit inside them with her was, she was finding, the most disorienting thing that had happened to her in months. "My mother wrote me letters," she said. "I know," he said. "Hesta told me she'd kept them. She drew the flower my whole life so I would recognize it when I found this garden." He was quiet for a moment. "She was pointing you here," he said. "Yes," she said, "she was." The months continued. The advisory council found its rhythm, slowly, with the expected friction of a new institution inserting itself into established systems, but with the persistent forward motion of something whose members had waited long enough that they were not inclined to move at anyone else's pace. Sereth ran it with the calm authority of a woman who had spent 15 years thinking about exactly how she would do this if she ever got the chance. The reforms bedded in, not perfectly, nothing beds in perfectly, and Mira held the distinction carefully between a law on a document and a change in a life, but genuinely, in ways that registered in real people's daily existence. Pip was enrolled in the palace school, the one Kale had opened to all children regardless of station. His teacher submitted a report using the word extraordinary 3 times in 4 paragraphs. Aldrich accepted a senior record-keeping position and immediately began reorganizing the palace's entire archival system, which the archivists received with a mixture of relief and personal affront. Mira read both reports on the same evening and felt something she recognized, after a moment, as pride. She had not expected to feel pride for a while. She found she felt it fairly often now. 6 months after the council chamber, 4 months after the East Room, 3 months after the letters, Kale found her in the garden on a morning when the light was doing the thing it did in the later season, lower, more angled, turning ordinary surfaces gold. The covenant flower was in full bloom, covering the far wall completely, white flowers catching the morning light. He had been doing this regularly now, appearing in the early hours, old clothes, the second pair of gloves that lived permanently on the hook by the door. They worked in the same comfortable silence they had built over months. He stopped working at some point and looked at her. She looked up. "I want to ask you something," he said. She set down what she was holding. "The founding charter," he said. "The co-sovereign clause. I've been thinking about what it was designed to do." He paused. "It wasn't designed to split authority. It was designed to ensure that 2 different kinds of knowledge governed together, one from above the systems, one from inside them." She looked at him. "You have spent your entire life inside these systems. You know things about how this kingdom functions that I will never know from where I stand. My wolf can hear heartbeats through walls, but it took you to tell me what those heartbeats meant." "Kale, I'm not asking you to take a throne. I'm asking you to build something with me, formally, officially, with the founding charter as the framework and everything we've already been doing made permanent and named." The garden was very still around them. "What exactly are you asking?" she said. "I'm asking you to be my partner," he said, "in every sense of that word. Not my ward, not my advisor, not the woman I'm—" a pause with warmth in it. "All of those things, formally, publicly, permanently." She looked at him for a long time. The light came through the window above them and landed on the recovered path and the covenant flower and the second pair of gloves on the hook by the door. She thought about a 12-foot room, a wrong door, a king sitting on her floor learning to be honest about himself, a wolf choosing every single day to be still and follow and trust. She thought about her mother's letters in the box on her table. "I tried to give you a room with a window." She thought about a flower drawn across years and provinces pointing toward this garden, toward this man, toward this moment. She thought about sitting on the floor of this room reading those letters and him arriving and sitting down beside her without a word, just present, just there, just staying. "You understand what that means," she said. "The noble houses have been dealt with before and will be again. The optics of a former servant are a feature, not a problem," he said. "The kingdom needs to see that this is what governance looks like, both kinds of knowledge at the table, permanently." She looked at her hands, the calluses, the small scar, the ordinary hands of a woman her mother had spent her whole life pointing towards something extraordinary. "Ask me properly," she said. He took both her hands, not urgently, deliberately, the way he did things now, with the full weight of his attention and the specific consciousness of someone who had learned in a 12-foot room over 17 nights the difference between taking and choosing. His wolf was settled, that quality she had come to love most in him, the wolf and the man together, without conflict, present in the same moment without one suppressing the other. The alpha who had learned that the most powerful thing he could do was ask. "Mira," he said, "will you build this with me? Not the kingdom as it was, the one it could be, the one it was founded to be, if the founding charter had been honored from the beginning." His hands were warm around hers. "Will you stand beside me as it's built, and tell me when I'm moving too slowly, and sit on the floor with me when things fall apart, and let me sit on the floor with you for the same reason?" She looked at him. "And the window," he said. His voice dropped slightly. "Will you let me keep visiting?" She felt the laugh arrive, involuntary, real, the laugh she had been surprised to discover she had. "You already visit," she said. "I want to make it official," he said. She looked at their joined hands, at the garden, at the covenant flower covering the far wall, alive and flowering after 200 years of waiting to be found. "Yes," she said. The announcement was made on a clear morning 6 weeks later, in the main courtyard. The same crowd filled it again, broader this time, reaching into every part of the city. In the front row, Hesta and Pip and Aldrich and the kitchen women and the seamstress, all of whom had been told 3 days earlier and had reacted in ways entirely consistent with who they were. Hesta had said, "About time." Pip had said nothing, turned entirely red, and looked at the ceiling. Aldrich had asked 3 procedural questions and then said, "Good," with the satisfaction of a man whose understanding had been confirmed. The seamstress had cried. Mira had let her. Cale spoke about the founding charter, clearly, in language for everyone. He named the 14 names, as he always did. He spoke about what the co-sovereign clause meant and why it had been hidden and what its reinstatement was designed to protect against. He spoke about the advisory council and what it had already accomplished. Then he spoke about Mira and what partnership meant and what kind of kingdom they were building together. The courtyard received it with the full, complicated, living noise of people absorbing something that changed what they understood to be possible. Afterward, when the crowd had dispersed and the courtyard was empty and the afternoon light was doing what it did in that space, Mira sat on the stone steps with her back against the wall and looked at the sky. Cale sat beside her. Their shoulders touched. "You didn't look at the floor," he said. "No, I didn't." A pause. "How did it feel?" She thought about it seriously. "Like standing in a current," she said. "Like something was pushing against me, and I was pushing back, and neither of us was winning, but I was still standing." "That's what it always feels like," he said, "for what it's worth." "Does it get easier?" "It gets more familiar," he said. "I'm not sure easier is the right word." She looked at the empty courtyard. "I can work with familiar," she said. He reached over without looking at her and took her hand. Unhurried, certain, the gesture of someone who had been making conscious choices for long enough that this one required no deliberation. His wolf was present in the warmth of his grip, steady, certain, settled. She let him. The courtyard held its afternoon quiet around them both. The months that followed were the work, Not the dramatic work, not the council chamber confrontations, or the standoffs at the gates, or the trials that change the official record. The other kind, the daily, unglamorous, incremental work of building something new inside the shell of something old, which required more patience and more tolerance for imperfection and more willingness to fail and return the next morning than any crisis had required. The advisory council had its first serious conflict with the noble houses in its third month. Mira handled the mediation herself. It took 11 days. The outcome was a compromise that satisfied no one completely and functioned, which she had come to understand was often the best available result and should not be mistaken for failure. The reforms bedded in, slowly, imperfectly, genuinely. Pip passed his first academic review with results his teacher described as extraordinary, and followed up with a personal note suggesting he be given additional materials before he taught himself everything available and started asking questions no one could answer. Mira read the note twice and felt the warmth of it settle in her chest, alongside everything else that had settled there over the past year. The particular warm weight of things being built and people becoming themselves, and a kingdom slowly learning what it was supposed to be. On a morning in the second year, she found something in the garden. In the far corner, under a section of old stone she had cleared 2 weeks earlier, a root system. Old, extraordinarily old, spreading beneath the entire garden in a network so extensive that the head groundskeeper, called in to look at it, had stared at it for a long time before speaking. "This is the original root system from the founding era planting," he said. Mira looked at it. "It's still alive," she said. "Alive," he confirmed. "Everything you've been clearing this year, the overgrowth, the accumulated debris, it wasn't killing the original garden. It was growing on top of it." He paused. "The original planting has been here the whole time, just waiting for the surface to be cleared." He looked at the covenant flower covering the far wall. "That vine," he said, "is rooted in this system. It has been the whole time. Everything you thought was separate, it's all connected." Mira stood in the garden for a long time after he left. She thought about 200 years of a kingdom growing over the top of its own founding. She thought about a mother who had drawn a flower across a lifetime, keeping the connection alive on paper because the garden had been buried. She thought about root systems that survived in the dark, waiting for someone to clear enough surface to find them. She told Cale about it that evening. He listened to the whole account. Then he was quiet for a moment. "The founding charter," he said. "The original root system." "Yes," she said. "The kingdom was always this," he said. "It just got buried." "And it takes a lot of morning work to find it again," she said. "And the work isn't finished. It won't be finished in our lifetime." "No," he said. "But it's possible," she said. "That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not inevitable, not without the work, but possible." He looked at her. "You didn't believe that when you came through the wrong door," he said. She thought about it. "I believed it for other people," she said. "I didn't believe it for myself. I thought the best I could do was survive and keep my head down and get to the end of each day still standing." "And now?" She looked at the garden in the evening light, at the recovered path and the covenant flower and the ancient root system that had been there all along, patient and alive underneath everything that had tried to bury it. "Now," she said, "I think I was wrong about what surviving is allowed to look like." He took her hand. She let herself lean into him, not because she needed the support, but because she wanted to, which was a distinction that had taken her a long time to understand, and that she intended, going forward, to practice without apology. His wolf settled around them both like warmth. Outside the window, the garden held its deep roots in the dark, and the work continued. 1 year, 3 months, and 17 days after a king stumbled through the wrong door into a 12-foot room, Mira stood at the east window in the early morning and looked at the garden below. It was not finished. She had stopped expecting it to be. The garden was a living thing, and living things did not finish. They grew and needed tending and surprised you, and occasionally did something entirely unplanned in the far corner that turned out to be the most interesting thing there. She had come to believe the kingdom was the same. The sounds of the palace waking moved around her, guards changing, the first servants crossing corridors, the endless, persistent machinery of a place full of people going about the business of being alive. The same sounds she had catalogued for 4 years. Different now. She was part of them differently, present in a different register. Still listening, she would never stop listening. She had made her peace with the fact that the habit was structural now, built into her the way habits built in survival become permanent, but listening from inside rather than from the edges. From somewhere that felt, against all the evidence of her previous expectations, like home. Below the window, the covenant flower moved in the morning breeze. 2 bloodlines, 1 root system, flowering after 200 years of being left to grow on its own. 3 knocks on the door. Patient, certain, his. She turned from the window. "Come in," she said. And the morning began.